Hey everyone, today I wanted to go through all of the main James Bond villains and henchmen and tell you which ones are my favorite by putting them in this tier list. No, I did not make this list, and I really don't want to include all of these characters, so I'm stopping here at Odd Job. I kind of organized it so that it's all the main ones first, or all the main villains and then the henchmen, so that's how I'm going to do it. You know how these tier lists work, so top being the best, bottom being the worst. I'm going to be more talking about my opinion of the characters more so than how iconic they are, because that'd be a completely different list. So, um, starting off with the very first Bond villain in the series is Doctor No. I like him a lot, even though he doesn't have much like on-screen time. Uh, he is felt throughout the whole movie. His kind of presence and how intimidating he is, and nobody wants to cross him. And then eventually, whenever he is revealed, he's not maybe physically intimidating, but he gives off this intimidating like vibe to him that you don't want to do anything wrong, and he'll kill you. And I think some of the best scenes, even before he's on screen, is involving him, where that one like hitman that's sent to kill Bond is like being talked basically down to, but only through like a speaker, and he's even scared of just hearing his voice. So and then whenever he eventually dies, it's because of his main like attribute, which is his metal hands. He can't grip anything with them, but he can still like. There's a scene where he crushes like a little statue, but he can't grip tight enough on this like little platform that him and Bond are fighting on, and it ends up being lowered into, I guess it's like nuclear water or nuclear waste or something, and he ends up just melting, which I think one of the cooler Bond deaths, or villain deaths, I guess I should say. But for me, he's up in From Russia with Love. Uh, I'm saving my absolute favorites for the top tier, but he is close. So next is Yusufer Safin, who's the newest Bond villain in No Time to Die. He does a lot of good, but at the same time, I feel like the movie he's in and what he really kind of like. I don't like that he kills James Bond. Like, he's the one that eventually does it. I've never liked that idea, and he does enough in it for me to be better than some of the lower tiers, but I still don't really like him a lot. I would say he's probably my third favorite villain in the Craig era, but yeah, I can't put him too high. I think the scenes where he really stands out is the opening of the movie, where he goes after Mr. White, but he ends up finding Madeline, and then towards the end where he's got Mathilde held hostage from Bond. But I'm going to put him an all-time high. I could see myself putting him down one tier, but honestly, the top four tiers are really good. It's really just Live and Let Die and Positively Shocking that are the ones that, there's something about them. Nobody does it better. Absolute favorites. From Russia with Love is, I really like them. They're just not in the top like 5 or 6 all-time highs. I did really enjoy them, just not quite to the level that you'd hope. And I Expect You to Die is more, they're just not as important. So, and same thing kind of with Live and Let Die. So that's kind of how, moving into the next one, how I wanted to preface this, because the actor, I think his name is Julian Glover, is a really good actor, and he plays villains really well. I just feel like in the movie For Your Eyes Only, he plays Aristotle Christados. He's so forgettable that I feel like I can't put him anywhere else, and that's not his fault. It's just like the character really didn't have that much time on screen. I never, like, when I first watched the movie, I didn't even know who they were talking about half the time when they were mentioning him as the villain. I kind of found him really boring, like the character, like the way he was written. And ultimately, I can't say he's a strong main villain in the series. So even though I like him in Raiders of the, or not Raiders, Last Crusade as the main villain, and then he's has a short little like cameo, I guess you could say, in Empire Strikes Back. In the Bond series, I think he's a little bit forgettable compared to some of these other ones. Next is Donald Pleasant's version of Blofeld, and I'm going to put him in I Expect You to Die. Now, his version is my favorite Blofeld, but I just don't really, I've never liked the character of Blofeld. I feel like he's never been written well, or he's never really done enough for me to consider him. Like, if he's really supposed to be Bond's, like, number one arch nemesis, he really never does enough for me to really feel like he fits that. I know in On Her Majesty's Secret Service he kills uh, Tracy, but that movie to me really does not fit the series. I'm in the minority. I know a lot of people have come around to it and I like love that movie, but if I'm being honest, that's probably my last. That's like the one I least ever want to watch. Uh, I just have a hard time getting through it. So even though the actor who plays Blofeld, I'm putting him right there, and I expect he to die because Donald Pleasance doesn't have much of a like. He doesn't do much in that movie. He's only at the very end, but he's good. Whereas this version, I think his name is Telly Savalas or something similar to that. He's throughout most of the movie, and he does a good job. I just don't really like the movie he's in personally. His plan is interesting. The first time I watched it, I didn't quite understand it, but upon multiple viewings, I do think it's a better plan. I just never really behind George Lazenby as Bond. The middle section of the movie is so dull, and if it wasn't for the impact that Tracy's death had, I feel like that movie really wouldn't be considered as good as it was. And when that gets through the whole movie in the last scene, her death, I have a hard time sitting through that one, and I can't help but put them that low, which honestly really isn't that low. I still enjoy these four top tiers. Charles Gray version, oh, that's bad, and Diamonds Are Forever. He's probably the worst villain, and now that's not the actor's fault. He did exactly what they wanted him to do. It's just that version of Blofeld really should have never been made. He does good in other movies. For example, Rocky Horror Picture Show. He plays a very similar character, even like just not evil per se. He's more of just that kind of I can't think of the word, but very unique kind of take on the character. He takes that same kind of feel to that movie where I just don't think it fits as Blofeld. Him dressing in drag just kind of felt weird. Um, it just didn't feel like the character, so that felt more like a Charles Gray decision. But yeah, I don't like Diamonds Forever. Ultimately, that is why Diamonds is bottom probably three for me. So yeah, that that is a big reason he's that low. And then next is Christoph Waltz version that really I don't hate. I just don't like the idea that the reason he is doing all of what he's doing behind Spectre and going after Bond is because he's got daddy issues that his dad preferred James over him. It was just like really like that's so lame. That's literally a plot from Austin Powers. Like Blofeld is Doctor Evil, and his dad and had both Doctor Evil and Austin Powers, and they were separated before they were like near birth, so they didn't even know about it. And he became evil because he didn't have like a dad. It's like, oh my gosh, like you really took an Austin Powers joke and made it into a real thing. I don't think this is so much Christoph Waltz as the decision, because honestly, he's a good actor and he looks like he'd be a good Blofeld. I just don't think they ever wrote him very well, and I've kind of felt this over the past, I don't know, year or so, rewatching the Craig movies. The writing is so weak through some of them. I don't mind Quantum of Solace, but I do think the writing, because of the writer strike, was poor. Spectre has moments, but ultimately the big moments at the end really kind of take that movie down. What otherwise was actually a pretty good movie, and then No Time to Die has some really questionable decisions that, again, they take what they whatever they did wrong in Spectre, they kind of have to keep going with it for No Time to Die, which ultimately makes that movie fail at times, and then they have that conclusion. So yeah, and that's kind of Mr. White's on the same level, another Craig villain. He really is never on screen, and when he is, he's probably total on screen throughout the series for 15 minutes, but he's considered to be this like major villain amongst the Craig era, and he's probably in 5 scenes through all of the movies. He's only in three of them. He's at the end of Casino Royale for moments. He's in moments throughout Quantum, and he's probably got his most or the longest amount of time on screen in Spectre. So yeah, I can't really put him much higher. But we're now going to go the other direction with Silva from the Craig era. To me, the best villain that was in his era. The only minor complaint I have is that they decided to kind of retcon a little bit with this version of Blofeld, making him kind of like a servant of Spectre. But ultimately, if I just watch Skyfall and as if Spectre and No Time to Die never existed, he's a very good villain. My only minor complaint, other than that, is his death is a little anticlimactic. How I would have liked him to die is instead of getting a knife thrown into his back, is we see Bond run into the church at that scene where they've got the gun to his head and M, and you hear a gunshot and you think, oh, he pulled the trigger and killed them both, but you see that M had like a gun in her pocket or something, and she shot him in like the chest or the stomach or something, and when the camera turns from Bond to her, you see him like slowly just fall over or something, and yeah, I think that would have been a better death having M kill him than Bond, because M was really his target the whole time. Like he didn't care that much about Bond; it was getting to M. So, but besides that, he is one of the best villains. The whole deformity of his mouth being like caved in because he took a cyanide capsule and it didn't kill him because he was a prisoner and he gave up, but then he realized that he was meant to live to go and kill M. I think that was really interesting, and I love the whole like idea of a Bond villain have like a certain either deformity or attribute or something to make them stand out. And his really stood out to me. That was the first Bond movie I ever saw in theaters, and he's one of the best. He's probably in my top three of all the villains. So next is Rosa Klebb in From Russia with Love. She's definitely better than these three, so I'm going to put her in I Expect You to Die. She doesn't do all that, like, I shouldn't say she doesn't do all that much, but she doesn't have much screen time. She's more of someone that talks throughout the movie, and she's more serving Blofeld. But the scene at the end kind of ups her a little bit, where she's got the poison-tipped knife in her shoe, and she's trying to stab Bond, and he's holding her back with the chair. I think she's a pretty decent villain. I don't know if I'd consider her main villain, but I would definitely wouldn't consider her a henchman. So that's why I just put her with the main villains. So, but she does a good job. It's nothing wrong. It's just how they utilized her. So next is Francisco Scaramanga. I'm gonna put him up there and From Russia with Love also. It's really close. He'd probably be the number one choice to move up, but I'm saving that, like I said, for my absolute favorites. I love the idea of an assassin going up against Bond and one versus one duel and see who wins. And he kind of wants to cheat and use his funhouse to his advantage and uses knickknacks, help with the cameras and things like that. And also, he's got the golden gun, which is like an iconic thing. So, playing as him in all the games whenever I was a kid, he was one of the characters I always liked to pick. So, yeah, I can't say anything bad about him. And then also, he's played by Christopher Lee, who's also Count Dooku and countless other villains. I've never seen the Lord of the Rings movies, but yeah, I know he's one of the villains in there. So next is Dominic Green. He's got to go and Live and Let Die. He's not like a terrible villain. He's just not in any way intimidating. Like I can't see him being threatening. Like I wouldn't in any reason be scared of him. So it's more of the way they wrote the whole story with him in it. He's more of just like a businessman, and he's trying to basically buy this desert that's got an oasis under it, so he can he can cause this huge drought that basically he's going to make a ton of money from basically selling these villagers water. I think at least that's what was going on. It was a little bit confusing, and I haven't seen it in a while, but he's not bad because he does have the one scene that ultimately kind of like lifts him up out of positively shocking. But which is the axe fight at the end. How he ends up hitting himself in the foot with the axe is pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I can't really put him any higher than that. I definitely feel like he's on par with these other ones. So next is Franz Sanchez from License to Kill. Really underrated villain that definitely deserves to be up there in the From Russia with Love series, or I guess category, I guess I should say. But the things that he does throughout that movie, I like kind of forgot about some of it, and I went rewatched it yesterday, and I was like, man, I forgot he cuts a dude's heart out, or he has his guys cut someone's heart out. Um, he he kills the one Milton Crest by putting him in a pressure chamber. And he blows his head up, and then he's got a really great death by getting lit on fire. He's covered in that gasoline, and he gets lit on fire by Felix Leiter's lighter. So yeah, he's up there and From Russia with Love tier. Uh, just again shy of Nobody Does It Better. So, and next is Orc Goldfinger, one that I like, and I definitely like an iconic one in the series, but um, not a personal favorite. He's probably better than Safin, but I don't like look at him as highly as these ones. I know that's probably a little bit controversial, but if it wasn't for the scene where Bond's on the table with the laser, which that is a great scene, that is like the moment in the movie that I think it peaks. Um, I don't think he does anything else throughout that movie that makes me like him all that much, but that scene definitely would make me consider him moving him up. For me personally, I think he fits more an all time high. Next is Largo from Thunderball. These next three are very kind of similar for different reasons. Um, so I'm going to put them pretty much all in the same area. Largo probably is my favorite of the three. He's got that look with the eye patch that makes him stand out. He's kind of similar to Bond with his style. He wears suits. He likes to shoot. And he goes scuba diving. He likes cards, and he's more of like an evil version. I wouldn't call him like James Bond, but he's got the same interests as Bond. So, and I think his plot is pretty interesting. So I do like him, but he's not anywhere near any of my favorite villains or anything. Um, Next is Stromberg. Kind of same thing. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with him. I just, you know, he's not a personal favorite. I think throughout the movie he's kind of overshadowed by Jaws, which I'm perfectly okay with because Jaws is I spoiler, he's going up and Nobody Does It Better, but he's probably the most iconic henchman in the series. He's going to be overshadowed considering most of what he does is sit at the table and eat and then watch people get eaten by sharks, which that's cool, but you know it's not for me good enough to move them up any higher. These two both have like the same like water plan, something involving going under the water. His is about flooding the earth, I'm pretty sure. And then Hugo Drax, same thing. It's like, but his is like in space. He wants to create a super race of people up in space. Um, they're all pretty much equal. I like them, but they're all very similar. They're not like physically threatening, but they all have something about them that's intimidating enough that makes them stand out. And they aren't bad villains in any way. They're just not a personal favorite of mine. They're definitely on the level of these ones, and I still like them. Next is Kananga from Live and Let Die. I like him a lot. Some people I've heard recently don't like that movie. I've always liked it. It was my first Roger Moore movie that I saw of his. One of the first in the series I ever saw, maybe one of the first three even. And I've always liked it. And I think that actor, whose name I'm drawing a blank on, but I saw him in a show whenever I was younger. In the Heat of the Night, him and the actor who played Archie Bunker. And I just always liked him, and seeing him as a Bond villain, I think he did a great job. And I think his death is pretty interesting, how he gets that like pill that makes him expand and blow up, which it's silly, but I mean, for the Roger Moore era, that's actually not all that, out there. But yeah, I like him, and I think his henchmen and him work really well together. So yeah. Next is Brad Whitaker from The Living Daylights. Both him and the character following him, um, General Koskov, are both going in Live and Let Die. They're just kind of forgettable. I really like. I just bought The Living Daylights. I used to have it, but I uh, ended up rebuying it, and it's not come in yet. But I'm gonna watch the movie. But for this, I was like, I know who the villains are, but I don't remember their names, so I had to look up their names. So that's obviously not like a good sign. I remember a lot of Bond character names, but considering I had to look up their names for this, I can't really put them any higher. If you told me to pick one, I think it's definitely General Koskov is more memorable to me. I honestly didn't know Brad Whitaker was the villain until he fought Bond at the very end. I was like, and the first time I watched it, I was like, oh wait, it's like he's the villain, and I was a little bit young, so maybe I just didn't pick up on it in its entirety. I've only seen it once all the way through, but I've seen it in parts plenty of times now. So another one that's going up into my favorites is Alec Trevelyan from Goldeneye. Sean Bean plays him really well. I found out recently that they gave away that he's the main villain in the trailer for Goldeneye. How awesome would it have been if they didn't tell that? Because when I first watched this movie, I didn't know. I never played the game until actually just about a month ago, and the game's actually pretty fun. I see why it was considered a classic. But when I first watched Goldeneye, I had no idea that he was the villain. I just had assumed that he had died at the beginning of the movie. Him being a double O agent with Bond and being good friends, and then ultimately he betrays Bond, I think makes for one of the best villains. And then his death is pretty interesting with that whole fight scene on top of the satellite dish. So, yeah, I think one of the best villains in the series for sure. Next is Elliot Carver. He's an interesting one. He's definitely one of the more unique villains with how he's almost like straight up crazy at times. He wants to start World War III between Great Britain and China because of his media company. I think it's not getting any attention in China. They won't do anything with his company, so he wants to start a war so that his media conglomerate or whatever, I don't know, whatever you call it, gets full worldwide coverage, and he'll get high ratings and the fame and then the money from it. And he's even willing to kill his wife Paris for sleeping with Bond because they used to have a relationship. And yeah, I mean, I think he's a pretty interesting villain, kind of one of the underrated ones. He's got a cool death, being killed by that underwater drill, but he's not like a standout in terms of overall. I do think he's underrated, but I wouldn't put him in like my top five or anything for sure. Next, though, these two are in my top five because this is my favorite Bond movie. The World Is Not Enough has two. I would say Elektra's more the main villain for sure, but I wouldn't consider Renard a henchman. You think for a large portion of the movie, Renard is the main villain, that she's fallen for him and she's got Stockholm syndrome, but meanwhile she's using him to get what she wants, and she's really the one behind all this. She kind of makes Bond fall in love with her, and she played very well by Sophie Marceau, and one of my favorite characters and women in the entire series. That I think that movie gets kind of overlooked because it has a lot of hate for Denise Richards, which I ultimately, if that's the one thing in the entire series you can't buy into, is her being a nuclear scientist when there's so many other unbelievable things. I mean, whatever. I think that they've hired other bad actors or actresses to play roles, so like that being the only one that you think, like, I don't know. But either way, the movie I think is great. I do have some bias to it because it was the first one I ever saw, so I absolutely love it in every way. These two work so well together. It's like villain A and villain B, and I love his physical like trait. He's all scarred because he's shot in the head by another double O agent, and it's left him with permanent nerve damage. He has no feeling. He pushes himself harder, and he can't feel any pain. He doesn't feel anything at all. So there's like, at first he's shown something that makes him like more intimidating, where he holds a like a molten rock and he doesn't get burned. He doesn't feel, which that could have been improved a little bit, where he still would have damage, but he doesn't feel it at all, and he fights Bond and he's beating Bond because he doesn't feel any of it. And one of my favorite lines by him is whenever Bond's got him in the back of the head, he hits him with the gun and he's got him at gunpoint, and he's like a man tires of being executed. Um, but yeah, I think that they work really well together. And the one thing that I liked that I caught more recently, because when I watched that movie as a kid, I didn't pick up on these things, but how him and Elektra, he loves her even though she doesn't necessarily love him, and he can't feel her touch. He can't feel anything from her, and he feels like he can't be a man to her, while Bond can, and how that angers him. And yeah, I really like the way they wrote that whole thing. So I wanted to talk about that movie a little bit more, but we'll move on. Next is Kamal Khan. Um, I don't know. He's kind of in between these two. I really don't have much memory of Octopussy, if I'm being honest. It's not one of my favorites. It's definitely towards the bottom. In my tier list I made about a year ago, I put it lower than I probably would now. I still don't really like it, but I kind of focus too heavily on the negative than the some positive things that I do find in that movie. He is one of them, but I do feel like he's kind of on the level of like a Hugo Drax, a Largo, and a Stromberg. So um, he does have some good scenes. The one where him and Bond are playing dice is probably my favorite moment. Next is General Orlov, I believe his name is. It's also from the same movie. I'm not putting him low because I think of anything wrong. I just don't look at him as a main villain, but he is kind of considered one. I think Kamal Khan is a much better villain to Bond, where he's he's got a like interesting plan how he basically wants to just nuke the world, but I just don't remember him as much. He does have an interesting death where he is running to catch the train after he's basically about to be arrested and they just gun him down. So, yeah, I mean, he's not a bad character in any means. I just think he's in a movie I don't particularly like, and I don't think he's that great of a villain. Uh, Gustav Graves is just one that I don't think that they approached very well. I think he was better when he was the North Korean colonel than as the British millionaire. I I don't know. I just never liked him as a villain, and I don't think that's a controversial take that Die Another Day isn't a very good movie. The actor himself doesn't do anything wrong, and I do like the scene between him and Bond where is he reveals that he knows that he's the colonel, and he says, "So you live to die another day, Colonel," and then he's like, "Oh, finally you realized. Wondered how long it was going to take you." Like that scene's good, and I don't think he's a bad villain in the sense of like he has a villain look. I just don't think the movie and him work well together. Maybe in another one it would work, but next is Le Chiffre from Casino Royale, and he's going up there and From Russia with Love for sure. I could anyone that says Silva or Le Chiffre, I can whichever one you choose as your favorite, I can see it. I'm not gonna say you're wrong on those. I'm not gonna say you're wrong on any of them, but either way, you get my point. I think they're both great villains. Um, Even though he's ultimately under the thumb of Mr. White, he's still the main villain through that movie. I consider him. The scenes between him and Bond are just so well done. Whether they're playing poker, whether it's the torture scene, or just anything involving Mads Mikkelsen's portrayal, I don't have a complaint with. So I feel like that's fair putting him in there. And then Max Zorin is going up there with him. I think Christopher. Oh, Christopher Walken. I almost said Christoph Waltz. Christopher Walken plays him really well. Um, One of my favorites also. And I think A View to a Kill is actually a pretty decent movie for most of it. And I think it's largely due to Christopher Walken. So, and another character we'll lead to. So, next is the henchmen. So those are all the main villains. That's how I feel on them. If I were to move any up or down, maybe I'd move Safin down. But for now, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. So, next is Mr. Wint and Mr. Kit. I think it's Kit, not Kid, but like I said, I only saw Diamonds like once, so um, I think they're pretty interesting. I think they're the best part actually about that movie. I think they're the best villains. They're very unique, and I don't think they get talked about as much because they're in such a bad movie. Um, I think they're there just because of the movie they're in, but honestly, I consider them moving them up higher if they were in a better movie for sure. Necros from The Living Daylights, uh, I'd probably put there also. I think he's another one that it's just he's in a movie that he stands out. That I think he's the best villain in the movie. He's not got a lot of like villain competition around him. The movie's good for most of it. I think when it gets to the Afghanistan part, it slows down a little bit, but uh, yeah, every scene with him is good. I don't like him to this level yet. So Fiona Volpe, though, on the other hand, is a great villain, and I am putting her an all-time high. Um, Other than just the character herself, she's played very well by that actress, and yeah, I think she's one of the standout characters in Thunderball. Uh, Miranda Frost. I, however, do not like Miranda Frost. I'm I don't think positively shocking is fair, but I think she's really not like she's a good actress, Rosamund Pike, but I never think she's good at acting in this movie. She's very wooden. Uh, I guess yeah, she's not like horrible, but I just definitely don't like her. I never bought her as a MI6 agent either. I just never liked her, so personally, she's fairly low. Now we're going the opposite. Another one of my favorites, Xenia Onatopp from Goldeneye. Very good Bond villain for sure, one of the most memorable. And everything that they did with that character is great, from her death to the moments between her and Bond, the bathhouse scene, and then the race car scene, and everything in between. So yeah, there's no complaints there. And I think she fits well in the movie and as the second to Sean Bean's character. So, and then next is General Arumov. I don't think he's bad. I'm gonna put him around there because he does just enough to get the first half of the movie going. But if it was just him and there was no, Famke Jensen's character or Sean Bean's character, it would be disappointing. So I mean, I think he does just enough to get him to that point in the movie to where Bond kills him. But he's definitely not bad, and he has his moments. So, and then lastly from GoldenEye is Boris. I think he's a little bit better. He's interesting enough with his chemistry with Natalia, how they were friends, and also like Bond, she felt betrayed by a friend, and he's much more of like a weasel type character where he's meant to be like bullied, but his scene at the end with the pen, he's like, "Give me the codes, Natalia," and then Bond hits his wrist, and the pen goes flying and blows up everything. And then ultimately his death, how he says he's invincible, and then that liquid nitrogen freezes him. So yeah, I think it's fair to put him an all time high because he is one of the more memorable characters from that movie. Zhao from Die Another Day. Um, I think he's slightly better than these two. I think he's got a better look. He looks more of like a main villain to me than these ones. I like the diamonds in the face, and I like his death being crushed by a giant diamond chandelier. One of I think the better things in the movie, him and and Bond having that chase on ice has got its moments, even though it's ultimately a little bit silly with the invisible car thing. But still, I do think he is actually one of the good things in a bad movie. Red Grant, it's one of these two. I think he's one of my favorite henchmen because he's one. Normally I do like the over the top some of the villains, but he being more of like a regular just assassin, I think makes him better because he fits very very well up against Connery's Bond. The fight scene on the train alone puts him up there, and I feel like If that wasn't there, then maybe I could see him moving down. But that is one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. It's my favorite probably scene with Connery in his run. So uh, I think that he's a really good. You could consider him main villain, but I guess he's more henchman. So I do like him a lot. Stamper from Tomorrow Never Dies. I'm gonna put him right here. Stamper's there because he's got his moments, but he's not like a henchman that I think about all that much. Uh, the scene that got cut, I kind of would have liked to have keep in the movie just because you see how he has that name. I only recently saw it, but he gets told by Carver to like step on some dude's head and crush it, and like you don't see it, you just kind of hear it, and it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And the other scenes that he's in, you see how like kind of crazy he is. He shoots those British sailors, and then where he's fighting Bond, and his foot is stuck on the missile, and he's like, if I'm going, you're going with me. And Bond he slips out of his bulletproof vest, and then the rocket takes him up and blows up. But yeah, uh, I think he's a decent villain and probably the best henchman in that movie. Dr. Kaufman has a small role, so I can't put him much higher, but he does have a memorable scene for sure, and he's got an interesting look about him. And the scene in the movie, if you're not aware, is him and Bond. He finds Paris after Kaufman killed him, and he's waiting for him in his like hotel room, and Kaufman's got him at gunpoint. They send a call to him to open up Bond's car because they can't get it open, and then he ends up tricking Kaufman into typing in the code to use the taser on himself. Takes the gun off of him, and he says, "No, wait, I'm just a professional doing a job." And he says, "So am I." And he shoots him. So yeah, I mean, I do like him, and I think he's used just enough, but I can't put him any higher, and I don't think he's bad enough to be lower. Milton Crest, same thing. He's got his purpose, but he's not like a favorite or anything. I think honestly, what makes him stand out is you can tell by looking at him, he's not meant to be, like a likable person, but is everything up until his death, and then you see that satisfying death and how Bond tricks Sanchez into thinking that he stole his money, and he throws him in that pressure chamber. Just see his head explode. Is like when I first saw that movie, I had heard that it was like a little bit more brutal, and I was like, man, that was cool. Um, so yeah, I meant to put some of the henchmen together, so I'll switch over to Dario now, played by Benicio del Toro. I think he's a little bit better because he definitely does more of like physical stuff. His fight with Bond on the conveyor belt at the end is great. How he eventually gets chewed up into the cocaine grinder, and he's got kind of a look about him that he just looks evil. And his scenes early on with Bond and Pam are in that bar are good. So yeah, I think he's up there an all-time high. Mr. Hinks, wish he would have been used a little bit more. I really liked him, honestly. Of all the characters that they made in the Craig era, after Silva and Le Chiffre, Mr. Hinks was probably my third favorite. I just think he was really interesting. Dave Bautista, when I used to watch wrestling, watched him, and now that he does movies, I think that role, other than that last moment with him where he says one word, he was really good in. And his death was interesting, other than, like I said, that one word. And then the fight scenes, he just brutalizes Bond on that train where he's chasing him throughout the movie in the car. And then his introduction with the metal thumbs. He digs it into that guy's eyes and then he snaps his neck. Is great scene. So next is Emile Locke. Honestly, a little bit forgettable, but his death makes up for it. So I'm going to put him up, and I Expect You to Die. He looks like he'd be kind of an assassin type, so he does have the look, and he does have a nice death. But I think ultimately, because he's in kind of a forgettable movie, I think For Your Eyes Only is a little bit forgotten in the series, at least for me. It's not anywhere near a favorite, so yeah, I think he's fine, and he does just enough to put him in I Expect You to Die. Knick Knack, I like a lot. Oops. Knickknacks going up in From Russia with Love, just shy of Nobody Does It Better. Like I said, I really want to save those for my favorites. And I think he's like a fun counter to Scaramanga, where he at times you don't know whether he even wants Scaramanga to die because he's like, I get the island if he dies, and but I still think that they're friends, and but he's ultimately like his servant. So I do like him. I think he's an interesting character in the series, and it was fun playing as him in 007 Nightfire. Was the game I grew up with. So and then Gobinda from Octopussy is probably the best villain in that one. I'm gonna put him there. I think that he's got a really interesting look. That he's one of those just big guys, kind of like Stamper and Hinks, where he's just like physically intimidating, and he crushes the dice with his hands. He fights Bond on the plane at the end, and I do think he's pretty interesting, and he's one of the better things in that movie. Um, Teehee is from Live and Let Die. I like him a lot also. He's got that claw for a hand. I think it's pretty interesting. And I think he's, of the henchmen, him and then Baron Samedi are the two better ones. And I think that his moments with Bond are interesting. How he's told to break his fingers or do anything that he's told by Kananga, and uses that claw to crush things. And there's the alligator farm and the fight scene on the train at the end. So yeah, I do like him. Whisper, I mean, he was never written to be that much of a main character. I'm gonna put him there because he did fine, and I mean, I don't think he's bad. Whereas these ones are kind of like, I just don't really like them. So, and then the Snake Charmer, same thing. For what he's told to do, I think is fine. And Baron Samedi is close. I honestly will see. I might move him up at the end, but he's very shy of being up there. It looks like, but I do like him a lot. He's very unique. He's not in the movie all that much, so that might be why I'm thinking of leaving him here. The scenes though that he's in, he's memorable. He's got that really interesting laugh. He's got a really cool look of that, like the witch doctor. He uses like he's acting like he's using voodoo, and Bond thinks he kills him with shooting him the mannequins, and then he ultimately like knocks him into the coffin full of snakes, and you think he's dead, and then it appears at the end on the back of the train, which I think was a good way to end the movie. So Jaws is definitely going up. Like I said earlier, he's up and Nobody Does It Better. Uh, I think he's the only henchman in two movies. For or not for The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. Yeah, I think that he's definitely the best villain in both of those movies. So, and I think he's probably the most well-known Bond henchman in the entire series. So, Mayday is going in From Russia with Love. Another really good character in that movie that you can see how she's in love with Max Sorin, and then how betrayed she feels whenever she learns that he was just using her, and then she rides the bomb out, and she's laughing the whole time, and then when she sees him, her face turns like serious. And but yeah, she does so many other things throughout the movie. They're on the Eiffel Tower. She like pushes the car into the water. She picks the one guy up and throws him. She's like super strong. So yeah, I think that she's enough of a henchman and one of the more like memorable ones in the series. And then Odd Job, another one that's going up and Nobody Does It Better. I think those are my favorite characters in the series. Oddjob's very unique with that hat, and I think even though he doesn't do that much, I do like him more than Goldfinger himself. I think Goldfinger definitely should have been, the main villain, but for a henchman, I think Oddjob really set like a good standard, and the fight scene with him and Bond and his death being kind of tricked into going for his hat that's on the metal bars and getting electrocuted. Really great death. So that's my list. I'll go through some of these other ones that I'm not going to cover real fast. Cigar Girl she's not, I don't know if you consider her a henchman, but from The World Is Not Enough. I guess I'd put her right here because she does have enough in that movie that's good. Maybe I don't know if I could see her being up there. Um, Davidov, nah, he's not really. He doesn't have much of a purpose. So um, Elvis would be down here. I think that's his name. Him, I don't know his name for Your Eyes Only, but he's interesting. He reminds me a little bit of Necros from The Living Daylights. I forget his name too, but he's from The World Is Not Enough. So is Mr. Bullion. I know he's somewhere on this. There he is, right here. Um, yeah, I don't feel the need to add any more. So let me know what you guys think. Uh, some other ones I would conclude the Never Say Never Again. If I had made this list myself, I would probably put Fatima Blush right there, and then the main villain probably just one below, because I do think that she stood out just a little bit more, even though I do think that version of Largo was interesting too, but I still do like him more. So, yeah, anyway, let me know what your ranking would be, any that you like a lot, and some you don't like. So, I appreciate you guys watching. I'll talk to you soon.